At the center of this stood the Donovan residence, a home that seemed to embody the American dream. From the outside, the Donovans appeared to be the very image of a perfect blended family. Michael Donovan, a distinguished man in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair, had built a small empire in architectural design. His wife of 3 years, Christina, was a former actress whose grace and charm had seemingly not faded with age. Grace, Michael's biological daughter from his first marriage, was a bright and ambitious medical student, while Lucas, Christina's son, from her previous marriage, had recently graduated and was on the cusp of starting his career. To their neighbors and friends in Lake Oswego, the Donovans represented success, unity, and the possibility of second chances. Michael and Christina's whirlwind romance and subsequent marriage had been the talk of the town, a beacon of hope for those who believed in love after loss. The integration of their children into a cohesive family unit seemed effortless, a testament to their parenting and the adaptability of youth. Yet, beneath this carefully cultivated image of familial bliss, currents of tension and secrets ran deep. The walls of their house held whispers of unspoken truths, forbidden desires, and simmering resentments. Michael Donovan's journey to the pinnacle of suburban success was paved with both triumph and tragedy. Born to working-class parents in Pittsburgh, he had clawed his way up the socioeconomic ladder through sheer determination and an uncanny ability to spot lucrative opportunities. By his mid-30s, Michael had established a firm that reshaped the skyline of several mid-sized cities. His first marriage to Emily, a college sweetheart, had been a partnership of equals. Together, they navigated the challenges of building a business while raising their daughter, Grace. Emily's sudden death from an aneurysm when Grace was just 12 had left Michael a widower, forcing him to balance his grief with the responsibilities of single parenthood and an expanding business. For 5 years, Michael poured himself into his work and fatherhood, his romantic life relegated to the back burner. It wasn't until a chance encounter at a charity gala that he met Christina Price, a woman whose allure reignited his passion for life and love. Christina's path had been markedly different from Michael's. Discovered by a talent scout at 16, she graced TV screens and magazine covers throughout her 20s. Her marriage to Daniel Price, a travel blogger, produced a son, Lucas, but the union crumbled under the weight of Daniel's infidelities and Christina's fading acting career. Divorced at 35, Christina found herself navigating single motherhood and a world that seemed to value youth above all else. When Michael and Christina's worlds collided, it was as if the universe had granted them both a second chance at happiness. Their courtship was swift and intense, culminating in a lavish wedding that became the social event of the year in Lake Oswego. The newly formed Donovan family moved into the house, ready to begin their life together. Grace Donovan, now 20 and studying medicine at a prestigious university, initially struggled with her father's remarriage. Fiercely intelligent and deeply loyal to her late mother's memory, Grace approached her new family dynamic with a mixture of skepticism and reluctant acceptance. Over time, however, she found herself warming to Christina's genuine attempts at connection and the novelty of having a brother figure in her life. Lucas Price, 22, and freshly graduated with a degree in computer science, viewed his mother's marriage to Michael with a pragmatic eye. He appreciated the stability and opportunities that came with being part of the Donovan family, even as he harbored ambitions of forging his own path in the tech world. Charming and adaptable, Lucas seemed to ease into his role as stepson and brother with natural grace. As the family settled into their new dynamic, outsiders marveled at how seamlessly they had blended. Michael and Christina were seen as pillars of the community, hosting charity events and involving themselves in local politics. Grace and Lucas's academic achievements were points of pride, held up as examples of the family's success. Yet, behind closed doors, the careful balance of the Donovan household teetered on a precarious edge. Unspoken desires, hidden resentments, and the weight of expectations created an atmosphere ripe for upheaval. As the summer heat intensified, so too did the tensions, building towards a crescendo that would shatter the illusion of their perfect life. July 15th, 2023, dawned bright and oppressively humid in Lake Oswego. The Donovan household stirred to life with its usual morning rhythms, unaware that by nightfall, their lives would be irrevocably altered. Michael rose early, his mind already racing with the day's agenda. A crucial meeting with investors was scheduled for the afternoon, potentially opening doors for Donovan Design's most ambitious project yet. As he adjusted his tie with practiced precision, Christina entered their ensuite bathroom, her silk robe whispering against her skin. "Morning, darling," Christina murmured, pressing a kiss to Michael's cheek. "Any plans for dinner tonight? I was thinking we could try that new Italian place in town." Michael's reflection frowned slightly in the mirror. "I'm not sure when I'll be back," he replied. "This meeting could run late. Don't wait up for me." Christina's smile faltered for a moment before she recovered, years of acting training allowing her to maintain a pleasant facade. "Of course," she said lightly. "Another time, then." Downstairs, Grace hunched over a bowl of cereal, her eyes glued to her phone as she scrolled through social media. She barely glanced up as her father entered the kitchen, grunting a perfunctory, "Good morning." Lucas, ever the early riser, had already left for his internship at a local tech startup. His absence was noted by Michael, who had hoped to discuss some potential business connections that could benefit his stepson's budding career. As Michael gathered his briefcase and car keys, he paused to kiss Christina goodbye. With that, he was gone, the sound of his car engine fading as he drove away. The day progressed without incident. Grace left for her summer job at the local hospital, while Christina busied herself with household tasks and preparations for an upcoming charity event. The house settled into a quiet lull, the calm before an impending storm. It was just past 3 p.m. when Michael's car unexpectedly pulled into the driveway. His meeting had concluded early, a rare occurrence that left him with mixed feelings of triumph and unease. The deal had been secured faster than anticipated, leaving him with an unfamiliar stretch of free time. As he entered the house, the silence struck him as odd. Christina's car was gone, likely out running errands. Michael loosened his tie, deciding to use this unexpected free time to relax before sharing the good news with his family. His footsteps echoed through the empty hallway as he climbed the stairs, intent on changing into more comfortable clothes. As he approached the upper landing, a muffled sound caught his attention. It came from Grace's room, a mix of whispers and what sounded unsettlingly like stifled laughter. Concern and curiosity warred within Michael as he approached the door. He raised his hand to knock, but something held him back. The whispers grew more distinct, and with a jolt, Michael realized there were two voices, one unmistakably male. Without conscious thought, his hand moved to the doorknob. In the split second before he turned it, a part of Michael's mind screamed at him to stop, to walk away, to preserve the sanctity of trust between father and daughter. But that voice was drowned out by a rising tide of parental concern and an irrational surge of anger at the thought of some boy in his daughter's room. The door swung open. Time seemed to freeze as Michael's mind struggled to process the scene before him. On Grace's bed lay his daughter and Lucas, their entangled limbs in a state of undress, leaving no doubt as to the nature of their activities. For a heartbeat, the tableau held. Michael stood in the doorway, his face a mask of shock and dawning rage. Grace and Lucas, their eyes wide with fear and guilt, scrambled to cover themselves. Then, like a dam bursting, chaos erupted. Michael's world narrowed to a pinpoint of fury and betrayal. "What the hell is going on here?" he thundered, his eyes darting between Grace and Lucas, who were frantically pulling on discarded clothing. But Michael was beyond explanations. He rounded on Lucas, who stood frozen. "You," he snarled, jabbing a finger at his stepson's chest. "How dare you? In my house, with my daughter?" With a roar of incoherent rage, Michael lunged at Lucas, his hands closing around the young man's throat. They stumbled backward, crashing into Grace's desk, sending books and ornaments clattering to the floor. Grace screamed, pleading with her father to stop, but her words fell on deaf ears. Michael's world had contracted to this single act of violence, his fingers tightening as Lucas's face turned an alarming shade of purple. In desperation, Lucas's hands scrabbled across the desk, closing around a heavy crystal paperweight. With the last of his strength, he brought it crashing against the side of Michael's head. Michael's grip loosened as he staggered, blood streaming from the gash on his temple. But the blow had only served to further enrage him. He tackled Lucas to the ground. The two men grappled on the floor, a frenzied tangle of limbs and fury. In the chaotic struggle, Michael's hand closed once more around Lucas's throat, filled with rage and bleeding profusely. He squeezed with all his might. Lucas's struggles grew weaker, his eyes bulging as he gasped for air that wouldn't come. Grace's screams faded into background noise as Michael poured every ounce of his betrayal and anger into his grip. It wasn't until Lucas's body went limp beneath him that the red mist began to clear from his vision. Slowly, horrifyingly, the reality of what he had done began to sink in. Michael released his grip and scrambled backward, his hands shaking uncontrollably as he stared at the motionless form of his stepson. The aftermath of Lucas's death plunged the Donovan household into a nightmare of panic, guilt, and desperate decision-making. Michael, his clothes spattered with blood and his mind reeling, stared at the lifeless body of his stepson as Grace's hysterical sobs filled the room. "We have to call the police," Grace choked out between gasps, her hands shaking as she reached for her phone. Michael cut her off, his tone shifting from shock to a cold, calculated calm that chilled Grace to her core. "Listen to me very carefully," he said. "This was an accident, a terrible, tragic accident. But if the police come now, they won't see it that way. They'll destroy our family, our lives, everything we've built." Grace stared at her father, barely recognizing the man before her. "What are you saying?" she whispered. "We need to clean this up," Michael replied, his mind already racing through scenarios. "Your mother can never know what really happened here. Do you understand?" For a moment, Grace looked as though she might refuse. But then, whether out of shock, fear, or some twisted sense of loyalty, she nodded. The next few hours passed in a blur of frantic activity, Michael drawing on skills he never knew he possessed, as he methodically erased all traces of the struggle from Grace's room. Blood-stained carpets were torn up, furniture rearranged, and incriminating items bagged for disposal. Grace, still in a state of shock, followed her father's instructions mechanically. She scrubbed surfaces, laundered clothes, and helped move Lucas's body, wrapped in a tarp, to the garage. As twilight descended on Lake Oswego, Michael made a series of phone calls to his secretary, canceling all appointments for the next few days due to a family emergency. To Christina, his voice carefully modulated to convey concern rather than guilt, asking if she'd heard from Lucas, and to the local police, reporting his stepson missing, his tone a masterclass in worried parental concern. When Christina returned home, she found Michael and Grace seated in the living room, their faces grave. Michael spun a tale of Lucas storming out after an argument, of unanswered calls and growing worry. Grace, her eyes red-rimmed from tears that were all too real, corroborated her father's story with a nod. As night fell, the Donovan house became a hub of anxious activity. Friends and neighbors, alerted to Lucas's disappearance, arrived with casseroles and words of support. Police officers came and went, taking statements and assuring the family they were doing everything possible to locate the missing young man. Through it all, Michael maintained his facade of concerned stepfather, his arm around a distraught Christina, his voice steady as he answered questions and thanked well-wishers. Only Grace, watching her father with a mixture of fear and disbelief, knew the terrible truth that lay behind his performance. As the last visitors departed and Christina finally succumbed to exhaustion, Michael pulled Grace aside. "Remember," he murmured, "this is to protect our family." Grace, trapped in a nightmare of her own making, could only nod, sealing their pact of silence. As days stretched into weeks with no sign of the young man, the initial worry gave way to darker speculations. Detective Richard Bailey, a veteran of the police department, took charge of the investigation. A methodical and perceptive investigator, Bailey had seen his fair share of missing persons cases, but something about this one nagged at his instincts. His first formal interview with the Donovan family took place in their immaculate living room, the atmosphere heavy with tension, barely masked by suburban politeness. Christina, her eyes red-rimmed and hands clasping a barely touched cup of tea, recounted the last time she had seen her son. Bailey's gaze shifted to Michael, noting the man's composed demeanor. "Mr. Donovan, you reported having an argument with Lucas the day he disappeared. Can you tell me more about that?" Michael's response was measured, rehearsed to perfection in the dark hours of sleepless nights. "It was nothing serious," he explained. "Just a disagreement about Lucas's career plans. I wanted him to consider joining the family business, but he was set on pursuing his own path. I may have pushed too hard." "And you, Miss Donovan," he asked, turning to Grace, "did you witness this argument?" Grace, her face a mask of carefully cultivated grief, shook her head. "I was at work. When I got home, Lucas was already gone." As the interview progressed, Bailey probed gently but persistently, noting the family's reactions. Christina's genuine distress, Michael's controlled responses, and Grace's withdrawn demeanor all painted a complex picture that the detective couldn't quite decipher. In the days that followed, Bailey and his team delved deeper into Lucas's life. They interviewed friends, colleagues from his internship, and even ex-girlfriends. A portrait emerged of a young man with ambition, charm, and no apparent reason to vanish without a trace. Yet, as the investigation progressed, inconsistencies began to surface. Lucas's phone records showed no outgoing calls or messages on the day of his disappearance. His car, found parked at a local trailhead, yielded no useful evidence. And most puzzlingly, none of his friends corroborated the story of plans to meet up on the day he vanished. As Detective Bailey pinned another lead to the growing caseboard in the precinct, he couldn't shake the feeling that the key to this mystery lay within the walls of the Donovan house. As weeks turned into months, the facade of normalcy at the Donovan residence began to crack under the weight of their shared secret. Michael threw himself into work with renewed vigor, his aggressive expansion raising eyebrows in local business circles. Christina's once vibrant social life withered as she retreated into a shell of grief and confusion. And Grace, haunted by the dual specters of loss and complicity, withdrew from friends and studies alike. It was Grace who first showed signs of breaking under the strain. Her nights were plagued by vivid nightmares, her days by a gnawing guilt that threatened to consume her. The sight of her father going about his life as if nothing had happened filled her with a mixture of awe and revulsion. One particularly bad night, after waking from a dream of Lucas's accusing eyes, Grace found herself in the kitchen, a glass of water trembling in her hand. She didn't hear Christina enter until her stepmother spoke, making her jump. "Can't sleep either?" Christina asked softly, her own face etched with the lines of chronic insomnia. Something in Christina's gentle tone, so reminiscent of Lucas, broke through Grace's carefully constructed walls. Before she could stop herself, words began to spill out, disjointed at first, then in a torrent of confession. Christina listened, her face a canvas of shifting emotions, disbelief, horror, and finally a devastating understanding. When Grace finally fell silent, tears streaming down her face, Christina did something unexpected. She pulled her stepdaughter into a tight embrace. "I knew," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I knew about you and Lucas. I should have said something, should have stopped it. This is my fault too." As dawn broke over Lake Oswego, they made a pact of their own to confront Michael and bring the truth to light. Michael's reaction to their united front was explosive. His carefully maintained composure shattered as he raged against their betrayal, his words a toxic mix of threats and pleas for understanding. It was in this moment of unguarded fury that Detective Bailey, arriving for a follow-up interview, overheard the damning confession through the open window of his unmarked car. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Police swarmed the Donovan residence, securing the scene and separating the family members for questioning. Michael, realizing the game was up, retreated into stony silence, requesting a lawyer. Grace and Christina, however, unburdened by their confession, provided full statements. As the truth came to light, the community of Lake Oswego reeled from the revelations. The illicit relationship between step-siblings, Christina's silent knowledge, and Michael's fatal outburst painted a picture of a family torn apart by secrets and lies. In the midst of the chaos, Detective Bailey focused on the grim task at hand. With Michael's reluctant cooperation, Lucas's body was recovered from its hasty grave in a remote wooded area. The discovery brought a measure of closure to Christina, even as it sealed the case against her husband. The case against Michael Donovan seemed airtight, built on physical evidence and corroborating testimonies. Yet, as the trial approached, a new development threatened to upend the prosecution's carefully constructed narrative. Amidst the mountain of evidence being processed, a forensics technician made a startling discovery. DNA found under Lucas's fingernails didn't match Michael's profile. Instead, it pointed to an unknown male contributor. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. Detective Bailey, his certainty shaken, ordered a re-examination of all evidence. As the team delved deeper, more inconsistencies emerged. The angle of bruising on Lucas's neck suggested a left-handed attacker, while Michael was right-handed. Fibers found on the body didn't match those from the Donovan home. Pressure mounted on the prosecution as these findings came to light. The defense, sensing an opportunity, pushed for all charges against Michael to be dropped. However, the judge ruled that, given the confessions and circumstantial evidence, the trial would proceed. Grace and Christina, their united front beginning to crack under the strain of uncertainty, found themselves questioning their own memories of that fateful day. Had they been too quick to accept Michael's guilt, blinded by their own complicity in the events leading up to Lucas's death? As the trial date loomed, all parties involved grappled with the implications of this new information. The truth, it seemed, was far more complex than anyone had initially believed. In the courtroom, battle lines were drawn, with both prosecution and defense preparing to argue their interpretations of the increasingly convoluted evidence. The courtroom was packed on the day Michael Donovan was scheduled to take the stand. The air thrummed with tension as he was sworn in, his once commanding presence diminished by months in custody. And as questioning began, Michael's responses were measured, his demeanor calm, until the defense attorney broached the subject of the new DNA evidence. Michael's composure cracked, his eyes darting to where Grace sat in the gallery. In that moment, something seemed to break within him. To the shock of everyone present, he began to speak, his words pouring out in a torrent of confession, but not the one anyone expected. "I didn't kill Lucas," Michael declared, his voice raw with emotion, "but I am responsible for his death." He went on to describe the events of that day, but with a crucial difference. When he had walked in on Grace and Lucas, he admitted he had indeed been enraged, but it was Grace, in a panic to protect her lover and their secret, who had lashed out violently. "I walked in and saw them together," Michael recounted, his words echoing in the stunned silence of the courtroom. "I was angry, yes, but before I could even speak, Grace grabbed the paperweight. She struck Lucas, again and again. By the time I pulled her off, it was too late." The courtroom erupted into chaos as Michael described how, in a moment of paternal instinct, he had decided to protect his daughter. He had sent a hysterical Grace to clean herself up while he staged the scene to implicate himself, believing he could better weather the storm of a police investigation. "I never imagined it would go this far," he concluded, tears streaming down his face. "I was trying to protect my little girl, but I see now that I've destroyed us all." As Michael's words hung in the air, all eyes turned to Grace. Her face had drained of color, her body rigid with shock. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she could only manage a barely audible whisper. "It's true." In the gallery, Christina collapsed into silent sobs, the full weight of her family's destruction finally too much to bear. Detective Bailey, his case shattered but his instincts vindicated, began the mental process of reconstructing the investigation. As Michael was led from the stand, the courtroom remained in stunned silence, grappling with this final devastating twist in a case that had already defied expectations at every turn. The revelation of Grace's culpability and Michael's false confession threw the trial into disarray. The judge declared a mistrial, and both prosecution and defense scrambled to reassess their strategies in light of the new information. Grace was immediately taken into custody, her bail hearing scheduled for the following week. The prosecution, caught off guard by the turn of events, requested time to review the evidence and potentially file new charges against both Grace and Michael. Grace's defense team quickly began building a case around temporary insanity and crime of passion, emphasizing her youth and the shocking circumstances that led to her actions. They also didn't hesitate to shine a light on the questionable dynamics within the Donovan household that had allowed the relationship between step-siblings to develop unchecked. The trials of Grace Donovan and Michael Donovan, though separate, were inextricably linked in the public consciousness. Grace's trial came first, a somber affair that saw the once vibrant young woman appearing pale and withdrawn in the defendant's box. Her defense team, as planned, pursued a strategy of temporary insanity, bringing in expert witnesses to testify about the psychological impact of forbidden love and the fear of discovery. The prosecution painted a different picture, portraying Grace as a calculating individual who had engaged in an illicit relationship and then committed murder to keep it hidden. They emphasized the brutality of the attack and Grace's subsequent participation in the cover-up. Key testimony came from Christina, who spoke of her suspicions about Grace and Lucas's relationship and her regret at not intervening. Her words, delivered through tears, seemed to sway some jurors but alienated others, who saw her inaction as complicity. After days of deliberation, the juries in both trials returned with their verdicts, bringing the legal saga of the Donovan family to its conclusion. Grace Donovan was found guilty of second-degree murder, with the jury rejecting the insanity plea but acknowledging the crime's unpremeditated nature. The judge, taking into account Grace's age and the unusual circumstances of the case, sentenced her to 18 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 12 years. Michael Donovan was found guilty on charges of obstruction of justice and filing a false report. The judge, noting the unique circumstances and Michael's eventual confession, sentenced him to 5 years in prison, with 2 years suspended. As the Donovans were led from the courtroom for the last time, Lake Oswego began the long process of healing and reflection, grappling with the knowledge that even in the most seemingly perfect communities, darkness can lurk behind closed doors.